Good afternoon everyone, my name is Teresa Whitehurst and this is my colleague Jan Cook we're from Sunfield School, which is a residential special school in the West Midlands, and we cater for children between the ages of 6 and 19 with severe and complex learning needs. So our children are with us all year round, all the time. Jan's our IT trainer and I head up the Research Institute because basically what we invest in is good evidence-based practice, because what we want to find out is what works for our population of young people. The TDA Awards has given us the opportunity to look at a piece of work around the use of whiteboards. Whiteboards are becoming more and more prolific in mainstream schools. There's a whole range of knowledge around their use. For children in special schools and for children with the level of disability that we experience at Sunfield, there's very, very little information. So there's very little literature, there's very little in the way of resources for our teachers, and there's very little information for our teachers to work with. This has given us obviously the opportunity then to look at this in more detail, to create some resources and look at our teaching environments.
When we first had our whiteboards, we had to identify strengths, weaknesses, best practice. We had 7 classes that had got them, and we found that they'd just been placed on the wall and they said, there's your whiteboard, go on, use it. And people weren't using them, they were using them primarily, they were saying, right, Friday afternoon it's whiteboard session, not using it across all the lessons. There were also some of the classes just using them as a pinboard. They'd got blue tack on them, and we haven't got time to switch it on, we don't know what to do with it. So it was, going in. I went out to schools as well, looked at what they were doing with the whiteboards, and came back and tried to gently help them. The thing that we looked at first was the type of whiteboard to use. Did we have plasma screens? We had to look at projection. As you can see with these, you've got all this shadow. With our autistic children, they found that really off-putting. We looked at Promethean boards that have to use a pen. A lot of our students won't use a pen. They'll use a hand or they can use another object. So we found the touch screens were much better.
Okay, so what we wanted to focus on really today were the implications. So, as Jan's mentioned, our population of young people are primarily on the autistic spectrum at the severe end. And what we really wanted to do was create a set of guidelines, good practice, look at what we're doing in our schools and be able to share that with other special schools, but also with mainstream schools as well. I should say at this point that Jo Edgerton was the main lead on this project and she conducted all the research. She actually moved on to pastures new in February, so you've in no way hopefully been shortchanged by Jan and I, but I really do want to acknowledge that Jo did all this sterling work. Jo came out with really 4 things that, we'd really need to look at with the use of whiteboards with children with autism. The first one was optimising the environment in which we use the interactive whiteboard. And this is really about providing the best possible opportunity for our young people to learn. And this really comes down to how do we engage that population of learners. Education is all about, first and foremost, engaging the pupil in the learning dialogue. So what we wanted to look at, particularly with children with autism, is how we can facilitate that. Obviously, the key concept to be aware of there is the awareness of the needs of children with autism. We know that there are a lot of sensitivities, and particularly sensitivities to the learning environment. So even simple things like, matte laminate instead of shiny laminate, matte table surfaces, low noise reduction, fabrics within the room, all of these things really help that child to engage. As Jan's mentioned already, the use of whiteboards around site, we didn't, you've heard what Jan mentioned about, using them as pinboards, etc. Now, sometimes it was even just the position. So if you've got a whiteboard up here and you've got a student down here, if you actually want them to come to the front and engage in a learning activity and actually use the touch screen, if they can't even reach that, at that fundamental level, we need to optimise that learning environment.
We looked at the resources and we made a central resource base, so anything we make we can load onto the central base. One of the first things I did was introduce interactive registers, so the children come up, touch their face, and straight away their own choice of music comes up, so they've got some reward. We've had to really search for suitable programmes for our students. We've used a lot of Too Simple software. We found those were really, really good, and reacticles was a nice one because we could use peripherals. So we've got, you can use microphones with it, so you can get a child who may not want to touch the screen, but they can hold a mic and blow into it or make a loud noise. When they make that noise, something happens on the smart board. We've had lots of hands-on sessions with the staff, and I would say most of the classes now are using it actively. It's working out quite well.
The third consideration was actually our teaching approaches, and as I've mentioned, Teach is used widely across the site at Sunfield, and this is a very structured approach which gives our students a lot of predictability. It also breaks things down into very small steps. Delivery is very important because, again, we don't want a lot of verbals with our student, we don't want a lot of dialogue. What we want is for them to engage in the activity, not be confused with what we say. Unsurprisingly, predominantly the whiteboards have been used for group and individual learning. What Jo has written down as the main sort of way to facilitate and use the whiteboard is for exercises around revising, recalling and building on prior knowledge for the students, helping them to make choices, explore and predict. Again, with our population of young people, their choice-making skills are quite limited, and being able to facilitate this helps their development not just within the learning environment but in all aspects of their lives. Teaching approaches, as I've mentioned, the Teach approach really works well for us, the small steps. Peripheral devices, what we found predominantly were that these were actually much too complex for our young people. So things like voters, you know, the pads where you select things, that was quite difficult for our children to grasp. Visualisers worked better. We were fortunate to be loaned a visualiser, which is actually a way of projecting something onto the whiteboard that's a concrete object. Again, very important for our young people. Actually seeing a photo of an apple isn't an apple, seeing the apple is an apple. So again, translating that information, making it workable for our young people was really important.
As I said earlier, we trained all our staff. They all felt that their knowledge had been increased with the training, and they were more confident in the use of the interactive whiteboard, and it had increased throughout the project. And now they're using it, you know, quite in innovative ways. I went in the other day and they'd got, it was called Bhangra Size, and it was like exercise to Bhangra music, and they were all dancing around the classroom. They'd got it on the whiteboard, and it was really nice to go in and see these students who you wouldn't think would interact like that, enjoying it.
So where do we go from here then? Well, as Jan's mentioned, she delivered our one-day training session yesterday through the Professional Development Centre at Sunfield, and this is open to, you know, any schools, mainstream, special schools, right across the country. So hopefully what we can do through the facilitation of the TDA award is actually share our learning pathway and our journey through this at a much wider level. And also we've submitted an article to the Journal of Assistive Technology, again to try and disseminate this information and make it as widely available as possible. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.